A tiny white puppy refused to leave a frozen storm drain, shivering through snow and ice for days. When police finally looked inside, what they found left the whole town in shock, for children trapped, scared, and freezing. One brave little dog's loyalty turned a near tragedy into a miracle. The storm had been relentless for days. Snowflakes thick as feathers whipped across the small town, swallowing roads, freezing rooftops, and making even the bravest think twice before stepping outside. The air was sharp enough to sting the skin, and the silence of winter was broken only by the hiss of the wind as it howled through empty streets. But in the middle of this unforgiving landscape, something unusual caught the eyes of those who passed the intersection near the old storm drain. A tiny figure, barely visible against the endless white, was curled up on the frozen ground. A white puppy. At first, people thought it was just a lump of snow. But when the little body lifted its head, ears perked despite the cold, and let out a soft bark at anyone who got close, it became clear this wasn't just any stray. This was a guardian. Day after day, even as the blizzard worsened, the puppy didn't move far from the storm drain. It refused food from some passers-by, only sniffing at scraps before quickly returning to its post. Its small frame trembled violently in the freezing winds, and yet it would not abandon the dark, gaping mouth of the drain. Something was inside. Neighbors began whispering about the dog's strange behavior. Some thought it was simply lost, clinging to the drain for warmth. Others suspected cruelty, that someone had dumped the poor animal there. But the longer it stayed, the more people noticed the way it behaved, alert, determined, as if protecting something that couldn't protect itself. By the third day, children on their way home from school told their parents, "The puppy barks if you go near the grate." Like it's warning us. Adults laughed nervously at first. But when several tried to peek in, the dog growled low in its throat, forcing them back. This wasn't random. Finally, one concerned resident called the local animal shelter. "It's freezing out here, and this pup won't leave the storm drain," she said. "Something's not right." The shelter dispatched a volunteer named Sarah, a woman with years of experience handling strays. Bundled in heavy winter gear, she arrived at the scene with a bag of treats and a blanket. She spotted the puppy immediately, its fur dusted with snow, its body shaking, but its eyes sharp and unwavering. "Hey, little one," Sarah whispered, crouching low. "You're freezing out here. Let me help you." The puppy barked once, backing closer to the drain, glancing inside, and then back at her. Sarah followed its gaze. The grate was partly iced over, but the shadows inside stretched endlessly. She felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. She tried tossing food, but the dog didn't touch it. Instead, it whined, pacing between her and the drain opening, as if trying to explain something. Sarah's instincts told her this wasn't ordinary. Whatever the puppy was guarding wasn't just scraps or shelter. By the fourth day, the situation had escalated. Word spread quickly across the small town, and soon more people gathered near the storm drain, watching. Some offered food, others tried coaxing the dog with blankets, but nothing worked. The puppy remained steadfast. Finally, the police were called in. Officer Daniels, a veteran on the force, arrived with his partner. At first, he thought it was another case of an abandoned animal. But as he watched the small, trembling figure plant itself firmly between him and the drain, he frowned. "This isn't normal," he muttered. The officers tried approaching, but the puppy barked fiercely, refusing to budge. For something so small and weak-looking, it had an unshakable will. Daniels exchanged a look with his partner. "We need to check what's inside that drain," he said. The grate was iced solid, but with effort, they managed to pry it loose. A bitter gust of frozen air rushed out, carrying with it a smell that made Daniel stiffen. It wasn't sewage. The puppy barked wildly, circling them, as though urging them to look closer. Daniels crouched, shining his flashlight into the darkness. The beam cut through layers of ice and shadow, deeper and deeper until he froze. Something moved. Not a rat. Not debris. Something human. Daniel shot to his feet, his face pale. He turned to his partner, then back at the puppy, who was whining now, scratching at the opening. The dog wasn't just guarding an empty drain. It was protecting what lay hidden inside, something that would change everything. The storm raged on above, but all eyes were fixed on that dark opening. What was inside the storm drain was enough to stop even hardened police officers cold. And the little white puppy had been the only one keeping watch. The storm drain sat there, half buried in snow, like the mouth of something ancient and secret. Around it, the little white puppy held his post. No matter how much the wind howled or how bitter the air became, he wouldn't move more than a few cautious steps from that spot. His body was thin, ribs visible beneath his fluffy coat, but his spirit was fierce. Every time someone tried to approach the drain, he'd lower himself, bark sharply, and wag his tail in a strange mix of warning and hope. The officers called in backup. Soon, a small crowd gathered, neighbors who had noticed the commotion. Everyone wondered the same thing. What was the puppy guarding? Why wouldn't he leave? One officer, a woman named Clara, crouched down near the snow. Her voice softened. "It's okay, buddy. We're here to help." She extended a hand slowly. The puppy's ears flicked, his eyes darting from her to the drain. Then he barked again, urgent and desperate, as though trying to explain something no human could understand. He looked back at the opening, then at her, then back again, whimpering. Clara frowned. "Something's in there," she whispered. The others leaned in. The drain was dark, the kind of black that swallows light. Snow and ice crusted its edges. It hadn't been opened in years. From where they stood, it looked like nothing but an old pipe, cold and forgotten. But the puppy's behavior told a different story. They decided to check. Two officers pried at the frozen grate, their gloved hands slipping on the rusted iron. Finally, with a groan, the grate shifted, cracking the ice. A rush of stale, freezing air rose from the hole. Everyone held their breath. Clara shined her flashlight inside. At first, nothing. Just damp concrete walls and shadows. Then, a flicker. Movement. Clara leaned closer, her light catching shapes huddled deep within. She gasped. "Oh my God!" The puppy yelped and pawed at the snow, tail wagging furiously, as if to confirm what she'd seen. Inside the drain, pressed against the cold stone, were tiny forms. 4 of them. Puppies. Just like the white one, but smaller, weaker, trembling. Their fur was matted, their eyes wide with fear. They whimpered softly, their voices thin and fragile. The white puppy barked, tail wagging now in wild circles, his whole body trembling with relief. He wasn't guarding a secret. He wasn't lost. He was protecting his family. For a moment, silence hung heavy over the group. No one spoke. Snowflakes drifted down, soft and quiet, as though the world itself paused to honor the discovery. Then Clara whispered, her voice breaking. "He's been out here, all this time, just trying to keep them safe." The officers exchanged looks. It made sense now, the way the puppy never left, the way he barked at anyone who came close. He had been their shield, their guardian. While his little body endured the blizzards, he stood guard above them, refusing to abandon them even for food or warmth. But now came the hardest part, getting them out. The drain was narrow, the bottom slick with ice. Clara's flashlight revealed how the puppies were huddled together, pressed into a shallow pocket of space. If they had been left another night, they might not have survived. One officer radioed for animal rescue. Another prepared ropes and gloves. Clara stayed by the opening, speaking softly, her voice a lifeline in the cold. The white puppy barked at her, then at the drain, bouncing between them as though urging her to hurry. Minutes stretched long. The crowd grew. Neighbors whispered to each other, tears in their eyes. Parents pulled their children close, pointing to the little white guardian, explaining in hushed voices the meaning of loyalty and courage. When the animal rescue team arrived, the scene felt almost sacred. They knelt in the snow, setting up gear, moving gently, as if aware they were stepping into a story that would be remembered forever. One rescuer clipped a harness, preparing to lower himself into the icy drain. The white puppy barked, wagged, then whined, circling frantically. He knew. He understood help had finally come. His eyes locked onto Clara's, pleading, as if to say, "Please, save them. I did everything I could." The rescuer slid into the opening, boots scraping against frozen stone. He inched closer, flashlight beam trembling over the fragile bodies inside. The tiny puppies whimpered, too weak to move. Slowly, carefully, he reached out. One by one, he lifted them into a small sling, raising them up into waiting arms above. When the first one emerged, the crowd gasped. A tiny black and tan pup, no bigger than a mitten, shivering violently. Clara cradled it against her chest, wrapping it in a blanket. Tears streamed down her face. "You're safe now," she whispered. The white puppy leapt forward, sniffing and licking his sibling's face, tail wagging so hard his whole body shook. Then, as the next puppy surfaced, and the next, he repeated the same ritual: sniff, lick, circle, bark, until all four were above ground. At last, the rescuer climbed out, covered in ice and mud, shivering but smiling. "That's all of them." The white puppy barked once, sharply, then collapsed into the snow, exhausted. His body trembled, but his eyes shone with relief. He had done it. He had kept them alive until help arrived. Clara knelt beside him, wrapping him in her coat. "You brave boy," she whispered, holding him close. He pressed against her, closing his eyes, his small body finally allowing itself to rest. And yet, as the crowd cheered softly and the puppies whimpered in blankets, a question hung unspoken in the air. How had they ended up there in the first place? The storm drain was no place for puppies. And the way the white one had fought so fiercely, refusing to leave them, it suggested a story darker than anyone wanted to admit. The police exchanged looks. Something wasn't right. And deep down, Clara knew this was only the beginning. The storm had not eased in days. Snow fell in sheets, the wind carrying it sideways so that even standing upright felt like a battle. Emergency calls filled the lines, cars stuck in drifts, power outages, roofs collapsing under the weight of ice. Yet in the middle of all this chaos, one small figure remained unmoving, steadfast in its strange duty. The little white puppy. Despite the worsening weather, it hadn't moved far from the drain. Officers who rotated through the storm's shifts confirmed it. Whenever one came by, the dog was there. Huddled low against the icy lip of the grate, paws raw from scraping at the frozen edges, nose red from the cold. Its eyes stayed locked on the dark opening beneath. "Dogs don't do this without a reason," Officer Marquez muttered as he returned with coffee, his gaze fixed on the tiny silhouette in the snow. "Not for this long. Something's down there," Chief Harmon agreed. Though hardened by decades in uniform, even he felt the sting of something strange in this scene. Animals were often the first to sense danger or tragedy. He'd seen dogs bark hours before an earthquake hit, cats flee buildings before fire alarms sounded. But this? A puppy risking its life through nights of blizzard? It was no accident. When the plows finally cleared the main road, a city crew arrived with tools to break the grate free. The metal was slick with ice and rust, bolted tight. It took heat torches and crowbars, steam rising against the frigid air, before it finally loosened with a groan. The puppy darted forward immediately, whimpering, trying to nose its way past the men. One worker knelt to catch it, but it slipped through, small enough to wriggle between the bars. Gasps rose as its white tail disappeared into the blackness below. "Wait! No, stop!" someone shouted. But the little body was gone. For a long moment, all that echoed was the sound of the wind. Then came the faintest cry. Not from the puppy, but something else. A voice. Small, muffled, yet unmistakably human. Chief Harmon froze. His blood ran cold. "Did you hear that?" he asked. Every head turned, eyes wide. "Yes," Marquez whispered. "Oh my God, there's someone down there." Instantly, everything changed. Radios crackled, orders were shouted. Ropes were prepared, flashlights flicked on, and rescue gear was hauled forward. The puppy's mystery vigil had just transformed into a possible life-saving clue. But entering a storm drain in these conditions was dangerous. Ice water surged through the tunnels, levels rising from snowmelt. The risk of collapse or hypothermia was extreme. Still, there was no hesitation. If a life was at stake, they had no choice. Marquez clipped into the harness first. "I'll go." The crew lowered him slowly through the grate, his boots splashing into knee-deep, freezing water. The stench of rust and damp hit immediately. The beam of his flashlight shook across the slick concrete walls. "Hello," he called. "Is anyone down here?" From deeper in the tunnel came another sound, weak, strained, almost swallowed by the roar of water. A child's whimper. The puppy barked furiously, its echo bouncing off the walls, tail wagging in frantic urgency. It kept glancing down the tunnel, then back at the officer, as if begging him to follow. Heart pounding, Marquez waded forward, the icy current biting through his uniform. The tunnel narrowed, forcing him to crouch. His flashlight flickered across debris, branches, trash, chunks of ice carried down by the storm. And then, against the wall, he saw them. Two small hands gripping the concrete. Fingers blue with cold. A face barely above the rushing water. A little boy. "Got him," Marquez roared, voice breaking with adrenaline. "There's a child in here." Chaos erupted above ground. More ropes, blankets, medics, all surged into action. But below, the fight was brutal. The current tugged at the boy's body, threatening to sweep him under. His lips were pale, eyes half shut. "Hold on, buddy," Marquez shouted, shoving through the current to grab him. His gloves slipped on frozen skin, but he wrapped both arms tight, pulling the child against his chest. "I've got you, you're safe." The puppy whined, pacing nearby, as if it had been waiting for this exact moment. But as Marquez began to turn back toward the ladder, a sound stopped him cold. Another voice. From deeper inside the drain. Fainter, weaker, but still there. Another child. Marquez's eyes widened. He looked down at the boy in his arms, then back toward the darkness, where the puppy now stood at the edge of the current, barking desperately, tail rigid. "There's more than one," Marquez whispered into his radio. His voice cracked with urgency. "We've got multiple victims down here." Above, Chief Harmon's heart sank. This was no simple rescue anymore. This was a nightmare, and the puppy was the only reason they had found it in time. The snowstorm raged on, but its howling wind could not drown out the truth. Something unthinkable was hidden in that frozen drain. And until they uncovered it, no one was leaving. The little white puppy, soaked and shivering, barked once more into the blackness. A cry of warning. A call for courage. And with it, the police understood they had just stepped into a story that would shake their town forever. The sun dipped lower in the winter sky, painting the snow-dusted town in shades of rose and gold. For the first time in days, the storm had quieted, leaving only the crisp sound of boots crunching through the powder. Officer Daniels and Mia approached the storm drain with a renewed sense of determination, though a lingering weight of dread hung between them. The puppy, now named Snowflake by Mia, had grown more restless. He paced near the drain, whining sharply, his tiny body tense. It was as if he understood something terrible lingered below. "Easy, boy," Mia murmured, reaching down to stroke his fur. "We'll find out what you've been guarding." But Snowflake's gaze never left the drain. The rescue team had arrived at last. Two officers carried cutting tools, while a third brought floodlights to pierce the growing darkness. The heavy steel grate was frozen solid, sealed by layers of ice. As the men set to work, sparks flew against the snow, illuminating their breath in the freezing air. Every sound echoed strangely in the silence of the neighborhood, each metallic clang magnifying the tension in Mia's chest. Finally, after what felt like hours, the grate gave way with a groaning snap. A rush of stale, frigid air escaped from the dark tunnel. Snowflake barked wildly, his paws scraping against the edge of the concrete, trying to dive inside. "Hold him back," Daniels ordered, gripping the squirming pup as Mia crouched to peer into the opening. The beam of a flashlight cut into the pitch black. At first, there was nothing, just wet walls, trickling water, and silence. But then a sound emerged, faint yet distinct. A cry. Not the cry of an animal. Mia's heart lurched. "Did you hear that?" Daniel stiffened, his hand tightening on the flashlight. The muffled wail echoed again, a fragile sound that shattered the icy stillness. "It's a child," Mia whispered, her voice breaking. "There's a child down there." The officers exchanged startled glances. Without hesitation, Ropes and harnesses were secured. One of the men, slim enough to crawl through the narrow opening, descended into the drain. Snowflake's whimpers grew louder, his tiny frame trembling as he paced back and forth anxiously. Minutes crawled by like hours. The silence was unbearable, broken only by the scraping of boots against concrete below. Then a shout rose from the tunnel. "I found them. Oh my God, I found them." Mia's legs nearly gave out. She gripped the icy rim for balance, staring into the darkness as the rescuer's voice grew closer. The flashlight's glow flickered against the damp walls, revealing movement. One by one, small figures emerged. Children. 4 of them. They were filthy, shivering, their cheeks hollowed with hunger. Their eyes blinked against the sudden glare of light. The oldest, a girl no older than 10, clutched 2 younger siblings tightly against her chest. The youngest, a toddler barely able to walk, was wrapped in a torn blanket. The sight knocked the air from Mia's lungs. "Dear God," Daniels muttered, rushing forward to help lift them out. Paramedics scrambled closer, draping the children in thick blankets, checking their pulses, whispering reassurances as they were carried to safety. But Mia couldn't move. She was rooted to the spot, tears streaming down her frozen cheeks. She finally understood. The puppy had been guarding them. Alone, abandoned in the snow, he had refused to leave because he knew the children needed protection. Snowflake yelped and tried to leap toward the children, his tiny body quivering with relief. The oldest girl spotted him, her lips trembling as she whispered in a hoarse voice. You came back." The rescuers froze, turning toward her. Mia leaned in gently, brushing hair from the girl's dirt-streaked face. "Sweetheart, do you know this puppy?" The girl nodded weakly. He stayed with us. He wouldn't leave. Every night, he curled up by us. He kept us warm." Mia covered her mouth, unable to contain her sobs. Snowflake barked softly, tail wagging through the exhaustion, as if proud of his work. The puppy had not only found the children, he had saved their lives. As the paramedics carried the little ones toward the ambulance, townsfolk gathered around, drawn by the flashing lights. Gasps rippled through the crowd, many clutching hands to their mouths, others wiping at tears. What they saw was almost too incredible to believe. Daniel stood tall, but his voice cracked when he finally spoke. "That dog. No, that puppy did what no one else could. He refused to give up. He kept them alive." For a long moment, no one spoke. The snow fell silently again, blanketing the ground, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Then, slowly, applause began. It spread through the crowd, rising like a wave, not for the officers or the paramedics, but for the little white puppy standing proudly by the storm drain. Snowflake barked once, sharp and clear, as if accepting their gratitude. His body trembled, but his spirit stood unbroken. Mia knelt beside him, gathering him into her arms. Her tears fell into his fur as she whispered, "You're a hero, little one. You saved them all." But in her heart, Mia knew this was not the end of the story. The children's sudden appearance raised far more questions than answers. Who were they? How had they ended up trapped in the storm drain? And who had left them there, alone in the freezing dark? As the ambulances pulled away and the sirens faded into the night, the weight of those questions settled heavily in the air. Snowflake rested against Mia's chest, his eyes never leaving the drain. It was as if he knew the truth still lingered below, waiting to be uncovered. Snowflakes clung to the puppy's fur like tiny crystals as the storm drain echoed with the muffled cries of what was still hidden inside. The police officers had their flashlights angled downward, their breath thick clouds in the freezing air. The puppy refused to move far from the grate, whining, pawing at the iron bars, looking back at them with a kind of desperation no one could ignore. Officer Daniels crouched lower, pressing his cheek close to the icy metal. "There's more than one," he whispered, his voice tight. "I can hear them. Maybe 2, maybe 3. His partner leaned in, flashlight beam steady, catching the faintest flicker of eyes deep in the shadows. At first, the officers thought it must be other puppies, trapped and crying. But as the echoes sharpened, the sound wasn't just whimpering. It was almost a frantic calling. It stopped them cold. The younger officer shifted uneasily. This isn't just animals down there. The puppy barked sharply, pawing again, as though demanding action. Its little body trembled from cold and exhaustion, yet its eyes burned with determination. Somehow, this fragile creature had stayed out in the storm, refusing to leave whatever was hidden beneath the ground. The officers quickly radioed for backup and animal control. Within minutes, a small team arrived, armed with crowbars, bolt cutters, and thermal scanners. The drain cover was half frozen, wedged deep into the street. It took every ounce of strength, 3 men pulling in unison, to finally wrench it loose with a screeching groan of metal on concrete. The opening yawned wide, dark and damp, the stench of wet earth rushing up into the snow-chilled air. The flashlight beams cut through the shadows, and suddenly, the truth revealed itself. Curled against the wall of the drain, huddled beneath a tattered blanket, were 2 children, a boy and a girl. Their small hands clung to each other, eyes wide, faces pale from hunger and cold. Gasps rippled through the officers. For a long moment, no one moved. The puppy barked again, wagging its tail furiously, then glanced between the officers and the children as if to say, "See? This is what I've been trying to show you." One officer immediately descended into the drain, boots splashing into shallow, icy water. "It's okay, you're safe now," he called gently, reaching for them. The boy tightened his grip around the girl, hesitant, until the puppy whined at the opening, its tail still thumping weakly. That sound seemed to break the silence. The children finally stretched their trembling hands forward. The moment they were lifted out of the darkness, the snow seemed to fall quieter, as though the world itself paused. Wrapped quickly in thick blankets, the children clung to the officers, unable to speak but shivering with relief. "How long have they been down there?" one officer murmured. Another shook his head, still staring at the puppy. "Long enough that this little one never gave up on them." The puppy scrambled forward, pressing its wet nose against the girl's cheek, tail wagging as she buried her face into its fur. A sound that had been absent until now finally broke free, a weak, tearful laugh. The puppy had not just been guarding an empty drain. It had been protecting lives. And the question hung heavy in the frigid night air. Who had put the children there, and how had this tiny white guardian found them? But one thing was certain. The police officers would never again forget the sight of a trembling puppy that stopped them cold and led them to a miracle buried beneath the snow. The storm had passed, but the memory of it still lingered in the town like an echo. The snow was melting in places, revealing patches of earth and broken branches. But there was something else that thawed too, the heaviness in people's hearts. What they had witnessed, the little white puppy braving ice and snow, refusing to leave the storm drain, and the incredible discovery inside, was more than just a rescue. It was a reminder of loyalty, sacrifice, and how even the smallest life could carry the biggest courage. At the hospital, Officer Daniels checked in on the children again. They were recovering slowly, each one growing stronger every day. The doctors said the frostbite wasn't as severe as they feared, and the pneumonia was treatable. "Another few days, and they'll be out of here," one nurse whispered to Daniels. He nodded, but his eyes shifted to the small puppy curled up at the foot of the hospital bed, as though he belonged there. And in a way, he did. The kids had insisted he stay. They had clung to the pup the moment they were brought in, their trembling hands buried in his white fur. Nurses admitted that the puppy's presence calmed them more than any medication. He slept beside them, stood guard when they were too weak to move, and occasionally whined if a stranger came too close, as though he still believed he had to protect them. "Funny, isn't it?" Chief Ramirez said quietly, joining Daniels at the doorway. "That pup saved their lives, and now they won't let him out of their sight." Daniels chuckled softly. "I don't think he'll ever leave their side. That dog's got a job now, and he knows it." But behind that humor was the unshakable truth. If not for the puppy, no one would have known the children were down there in the drain. The snowstorm had muffled their cries, the storm drain had hidden them, and the town's frantic search had nearly given up. It was the pup's refusal to leave, his stubborn guard, that had forced them to look closer. The town knew it too. News spread quickly. Within days, television crews showed up, their cameras capturing the fragile children wrapped in blankets, smiling shyly as they held the puppy. Headlines appeared, White puppy saves 4 lost children. Hero dog braved the blizzard to guard storm drain. Miracle in the snow. But for the townspeople, it wasn't about headlines. It was about gratitude. Strangers dropped off food and toys for the children. Others brought dog food, collars, and blankets for the puppy, insisting the little hero be cared for like royalty. The police station was overwhelmed with phone calls from people offering to adopt him. But every time, the children shook their heads. "He's ours," one of the older boys said simply, his voice raspy but firm. "He stayed with us when nobody else could. We're not letting him go." And nobody argued. Not even Daniels. He saw in their eyes the same bond he had witnessed at the storm drain. The trust, the love, the unbreakable promise between them. Still, questions lingered. Where had the puppy come from? Why was he there in the snowstorm, alone, guarding so fiercely? Some believed he had been abandoned, a stray that somehow stumbled across the children and recognized their need. Others whispered something more, something almost mystical. "It's like he knew," one nurse murmured. Like he was sent there for them. Daniels didn't dismiss it. He had seen many strange things in his career, but nothing like this. Sometimes, he thought, miracles wore fur and had 4 paws. Weeks later, when the children were finally discharged, the entire town gathered at the hospital entrance. The snow had melted almost completely now, leaving the streets wet and muddy, but the air was warmer, lighter. The children walked out slowly, hand in hand, with the white puppy prancing proudly beside them, his tail wagging. He wore a new collar, red, with a shiny silver tag engraved. "Stormy, our hero." The crowd erupted into cheers, but Stormy only barked once and stayed close to the kids, his eyes sharp, still protective. He didn't care about the applause. He cared about them. Officer Daniels stood a few feet away, watching as Stormy leapt up to lick one of the children's faces. He felt something stir inside him, something heavy finally lifting. For all the tragedies he had seen, for all the heartbreak his badge had carried him through, this was the moment that reminded him why he chose to serve. It wasn't about rules or arrests or reports. It was about saving lives, about second chances, about hope. That night, as Daniel sat at his desk, finishing the final report, he paused before the last line. He thought about the storm drain, the snow, the desperate cries, the puppy refusing to move. He thought about the way the children smiled now, alive and healing, because one small creature had refused to give up. And then he wrote, "If not for Stormy, they would not be here today." A white puppy braved the snow to guard what mattered most. He did what no human could. He never gave up. This town owes him more than words can say. He set the pen down, leaned back, and let out a long breath. Outside, he could hear faint barking, the sound of Stormy playing with the children under the night sky. It was the kind of sound that carried through the streets, warming hearts like the first thaw of spring. And in that moment, Daniels knew the truth. Sometimes heroes come in uniforms, sometimes in badges, but sometimes the greatest hero of all comes on 4 paws, with snow still clinging to his fur and love burning bright in his heart.